Today on Inside the Issues, I speak with Ambassador David Jacobson on U.S.-Canadian relations. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Inside the Issues, a CIGI online podcast. I'm David Welch, the Director of the Balsley School of International Affairs, as well as CIGI Chair of Global Security. And every week I'm pleased to welcome a guest here into the studios at the Centre for International Governance Innovation in Waterloo, Ontario, to talk about some important issue on global governance. And today I'm very happy to welcome the U.S. Ambassador to Canada, David Jacobson. Very kind of you to join us here in the studio today.
It's a pleasure to be here, David.
And I'm sure people will have a lot of things they would love for me to ask you about U.S.-Canadian relations, but we'll do our best in the time available. And I'd like to start, if possible, from a more macro perspective, get your thoughts about sort of the big challenges and opportunities for the United States and Canada moving forward, and possibly start with the opportunities. People tend to focus on the negative, so why don't we start with the positive?
Well, you know, it is probably the most extraordinary, closest relationship between two countries anywhere in the world. It is an extraordinary experience. I'm very lucky to be here. The President sent me to a place where we had probably the strongest relationship, and my job is to try to make it even stronger. I think that the great opportunities, the greatest opportunities that we face in the short term arise out of the twin agreements that the President and the Prime Minister have been working on over the last several months. One is the Beyond the Border Initiative, the other is the Regulatory Cooperation Council. And these are important because they do two things and do them at the same time. One is they are going to make North America safer, while at the same time making it easier for people and goods that are safe and well-meaning to move back and forth across the border, which is going to increase our competitiveness, increase the sizes of our economies, create jobs, make the world better for the people in both of our countries. And so I would look at those as really the two great opportunities that we have.
Now, the Beyond the Border Initiative specifically is going to enhance the flow of goods and services and people. I guess in the first instance, people. Can you help us understand a bit more exactly the components of that initiative? What particular issue areas require sustained attention and ultimately agreement?
Well, there are, I believe, 31 separate items, but they fall into a few larger categories. I mean, one of the categories is increasing the infrastructure, making sure that the infrastructure that we have at the border is the appropriate infrastructure for the 21st century. Some of this stuff dates back before the Second World War, and it just doesn't make sense in the world we live in. But most fundamentally, and this is the thing that really registered with me, it is that by getting more information earlier and not making decisions about people or goods at the border, but rather before the border, which is why we call it Beyond the Borders, that we will be able to do two things at the same time. We will be able to make us safer, and we will be able to make us more efficient. That one of the things we've learned over the last several years is that it is a false choice between those two. That if we're smart, if we do more of the smart stuff and less of the dumb stuff, that we will be both safer and more secure at the same time.
Now, the challenges associated with that, would you characterize as more technical in nature? In other words, the difficulty of actually getting people in the places where they have to be to do pre-clearance and pre-screening? Or is it more the political and the social, calming people's nerves about things like sharing information across the border, personal information of various kinds, combination of the two, maybe in equal proportion?
Well, I think the answer is that there's a little bit of both. With respect to the political, the social issue, there is clearly an issue with respect to information sharing, and there is concern on both sides of the border, as there should be, with respect to protecting privacy, with respect to protecting individual rights. One of the very first things that we are going to address, and we're in the process of working our way through this, is a joint statement of privacy principles. And the one thing that I feel very strongly about is that people on both sides of the border have the same level of respect for privacy, for individual rights, that we sometimes protect them in slightly different ways, but that we all believe in the same thing. So that's one side of this. The other side of it, there are a number of just technical challenges, and let me give you a good one. One of the things we want to come up with is something called a single window. When I go to buy something on Amazon.com, I can buy a book and I can buy some shoes and I can buy a TV set all at the same time, and they actually come from 3 different vendors, but I don't know that. I just fill the information in on Amazon and they send the request to the different vendors and the stuff gets shipped to me, and it's all transparent to me. I fill out one form online, I give them my credit card one time. If someone wants to export something from the United States to Canada or Canada to the United States, oftentimes they have to fill out 4, 5, 6, 7 different forms, different agencies. And the idea is to come up with one single portal where you'll fill in your information once, and it's up to us to be as good as Amazon.com, to send it to the right places. It will become much more efficient, it will become much more effective. The problem is, technically, that's very complicated. Every agency in each of the 2 governments has a different computer system, and they have different information, and so we're going to have to work our way through that, and that one's going to take a little bit longer than some of these other things, and which also points to another piece of this beyond the border challenge. This is not going to all happen at once. This is going to happen over months and, in some instances, years. We are going to try to tackle the more simple, more straightforward things earlier, privacy principles, and we are going to start working, and we already have started working on some of the more complex, longer-term things like the single window.
And how much of a complication is the fact that both countries are federal? And at least in the Canadian case, you've got provinces with significant areas of jurisdiction and significant regulatory obstacles of their own.
Well, we have the same thing in the United States. The agreements are at the federal level. And what we're trying to do is deal with as much as we can at the federal level. That doesn't mean that there won't be occasions where we could deal with the states, we could deal with the provinces, but we can do an awful lot at the federal level to make an awful lot of difference in people's lives, and that's where we're focusing right now.
Very good. We'll be back in a moment with David Jacobson to talk more about U.S.-Canadian relations. You're watching or listening to Inside the Issues, a CIGI online podcast. Look for us at cgonline.org, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. Welcome back. Well, the United States and Canada are not only 2 of the most tightly integrated economies in the world, they're 2 of the most tightly integrated societies, but they're both globally connected too. And so international relations are relevant for both countries. The other countries' international relations are relevant for both countries. Our Prime Minister recently has been in East Asia, and in particular to China, where he's been attempting to cultivate trade and other deals of various kinds. How does this affect the U.S.-Canadian relationship at all, and what sort of perspective would you bring to Canada's foreign policy toward other parts of the world from a continental perspective?
Well, first of all, let me say, in the broadest of perspectives, Canada and the United States are partners in the world. We share very similar values. We work together, whether it was in Afghanistan or in Libya or now in Syria, in Iran, elsewhere. We are very much in sync, and the United States views Canada very much as a partner in the world. With respect to China in particular, and with respect to there's been some suggestion by some that, well, Canada should use the threat of trade with China as some sort of a club with the United States. And the people who say that, I think, don't understand the benefit of trade. That as Canada, our largest trading partner, opens up new markets in Asia or anywhere else, just as we are trying to open up new markets in Asia and elsewhere, that is not only not bad for the United States, that is good for the United States. That trade is good for everyone. The more that Canada sells abroad, the more U.S. content is going to be included in the goods. The more energy that's extracted, they're going to use more U.S. equipment to extract the energy, and the more money there will be in Canada to buy stuff in the United States that we want to sell. So this is something that's not only is it not harmful to the United States, but it is helpful to the United States. And we applaud Canada for doing this. It is the same thing we're doing, and we wish them well.
No, Canada and the United States have a very robust free trade agreement.
We do.
And broadened to include Mexico not long after the original Canada-U.S. agreement was struck. And yet the United States and Canada are both negotiating free trade arrangements with different countries around the world on slightly different timetables. Would there be some advantage to a joint effort to trying to coordinate those activities to try to promote free trade with other parties in a way that's consistent with the Canadian-U.S. free trade agreement?
Well, the answer is, it is easier to negotiate bilateral trading agreements than multilateral trading agreements. It's just,
Right.
it's easier to negotiate with one party than several parties. But there are several multilateral discussions underway, the most notable of which is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, which is an agreement involving the United States and Australia, New Zealand, Vietnam, Chile, a couple of other countries. Canada has indicated that they want to get into TPP. Mexico has indicated they want to get into TPP, and Japan has indicated they want to get into TPP. And we're talking with the Canadians, we are talking with the Mexicans, we are talking with Japan, as are the other TPP members. This is not a U.S. decision about whether this makes sense at this stage of the game to bring other countries in. And we're just going to have to see what happens. But again, trade is good. And lowering trade barriers, whether it is with Asian countries or with Canada or Mexico or the European Union, that's good. It is good for Canada. It's good for the United States. You talk about NAFTA. NAFTA has been an enormously beneficial treaty for Mexico. It has been an enormously beneficial treaty for Canada, and it has been an enormously beneficial treaty for the United States. Our trade with Canada has gone up threefold. And it is basically balanced between trade between the United States and Canada. This creates jobs in both countries. It creates economic opportunity in both countries. This is good for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Now, you also mentioned that regulatory harmonization is on the agenda as another great opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
How would you describe the nature of the issue there, and what kind of progress might we expect to see?
Well, this is the so-called tyranny of small differences. The example that is my favorite to use is Cheerios, that every morning I have Cheerios for breakfast. I had them for breakfast when I lived in the United States. I now have them for breakfast when I live in Canada. And when I was in the United States, Cheerios were fortified with a recipe that was required by the United States government. And in Canada, they're fortified with a recipe that's required by the Canadian government. And the two recipes are different. And I can assure you, David, I do not feel either healthier or cheerier in one country or another. It just doesn't make any sense.
And no noticeable difference.
And there are thousands of these. People come to me all the time. Deodorants are different between the United States and Canada. And I would dare say that your Canadian viewers, when they go to the United States on vacation and they pick up some deodorant, they're probably not sitting there and going, "Oh my goodness, it's this junky American deodorant." There are differences that just don't make a whole lot of sense. And then there's some that are very, very important to us in autos, in food safety, in pharmaceuticals. And there are things that are different just because they're different. And what we want to do is to try to eliminate as many of those differences as we can, and to try to prevent new differences from forming on a going forward basis. And that as we do that, we are going to reduce cost, we are going to increase competitiveness of North America, we're going to increase customer satisfaction, and we're going to create jobs.
Mm-hmm. Very good. We'll be right back with David Jacobson. You're watching or listening to Inside the Issues, a CIGI online podcast. Look for us at cgionline.org, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. Welcome back. Now let's talk a bit about the social and cultural aspects of the relationship. George Bernard Shaw once said that the United States and Britain were two countries separated by a common language. We could say the same. Canada's always liked to claim a special relationship with the United States. I believe it's one of 37 countries that claims a special relationship
it's
with
a
the United
particularly special relationship.
but it is very close. And just last week or 2 weeks ago, perhaps, there was a poll released in the United States that showed that still Americans look at Canadians more favorably than any other country in the world.
Actually, I think it was a 96% approval rating, which was the highest approval that they had ever measured in that poll.
Which is remarkable.
It's pretty good.
And
I don't know where they found the 4% that didn't approve. I must be guys who are hockey fans or something.
And Canadians famously like to, armchair quarterback Canadian American politics, but actually very good terms with their American neighbors. And probably the president you represent is more popular in Canada than even in the United States.
He's quite popular.
So you've got a lot of social capital and cultural similarity to work with. How does that affect your job as an ambassador?
Well, it makes it enormously easier. There is a relationship that the Canadian people have with the American people, and vice versa. You point out the approval rating that we have. And that creates a level of trust, it creates a level of understanding. But there's another part of this, and that is that because there are not dramatic cultural differences, when we have disagreements, as any two countries with as broad and as deep a set of relationships as we have are inevitably going to have differences, that it's much easier for us to solve them, that we approach these differences in a very mature fashion. I've always said in my dealings with Canadians that the best way, and particularly with the government, that the best way for us to resolve our differences when we have differences is to be candid. And that is not always true between the United States and other countries around the world. We really do have a special relationship. We watch the same TV, we go to the same sporting events, we have very many of the same values. Not all, but very many of the same values. And that makes my job a lot easier.
Now, when the issues do arise, is there a tyranny of small differences effect? Do you think that issues, in a sense, become inflated or blown out of proportion in part because they are relatively minor differences?
Sometimes that's true. I've oftentimes said it would be, particularly at the beginning, it would have been easier to be in a country where you're just butting heads all the time, because the differences are very stark and you don't have to be subtle and you don't have to be sophisticated. Here, the differences sometimes are very nuanced. Mm-hmm. And it's important to try to understand the other side's point of view as much as you can in order to try to deal with the nuance, understand the nuance, and resolve the nuance. But fundamentally, we have an extraordinary relationship. We are celebrating this year the 200th anniversary of the War of 1812, and I am not an expert in the War of 1812, but I think I know a lot about the 200 years of peace since 1812, mm-hmm. and the fact that 200 years ago we were burning each other's capitals, we were killing each other, and today we are the very, very closest of friends. And to me, that should give great hope to places around the world where they're not getting along with their neighbors and they think that they have intractable problems, that we had intractable problems, we overcame them, and look where we are now, 96% approval rating.
So does the high baseline of good quality relationship in this bilateral situation actually make it difficult for you to get the president's attention on Canadian issues? I mean, imagine his desk is full of files, difficult cases in Iran, North Korea.
The president's got a lot of things on his plate.
How much does Canada come up?
It comes up often. I mean, I think the president and the prime minister, if he has not met more with the prime minister of Canada than any other leader, I can't think of too many others where he's met more. He meets with him all the time. Some of them in these large multilateral meetings, G8, G20, sometimes bilateral meetings. I've been at a few in the White House over the last several months. We have the North American Leaders Summit coming up. We have a variety of these meetings where the president and the prime minister meet. I have never found some enormous deficiency in the ability of my government, not just the president, but of my government to address issues with Canada. Everyone understands they are our largest trading partner, our largest foreign supplier of energy. We've got a 5,500-mile, 9,000-kilometer border with the Canadians. We defend North America together, whether it is at NORAD or elsewhere. This is a critically important relationship. One could well argue the most important relationship the United States has in the world, and when it needs attention, it gets it. We probably have to spend a little more time on some of the problem areas of the world, It's like you got a problem kid, you probably have to spend more time with the problem kid than the A student, and you guys are the A student.
Well, that's good to hear. We'll be back once more with David Jacobson. You're watching or listening to Inside the Issues, a CIGI online podcast. Look for us at cgonline.org, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. Welcome back. So you seem very happy with the overall state of the way in which Canada and the United States interact on a government
Things are going well.
Are there ways you could imagine it improving? And if so, what kind of improvements would you recommend for communications between Ottawa and Washington?
Well, look, anything can be improved. Anything can be improved. But I will say that we have the probably the strongest, most mature relationship of any two countries in the world. You could let us win a few more international hockey tournaments and things like that. That might put my boss in a little bit better mood. But by and large, it's really very good. I was had a conversation with a senior official in your government. This was just before the holidays, and he called me just to wish me happy holidays. And he said, and I agreed, that it just feels so good, the relationship, that we respect each other, that we deal with each other frankly. And there are always moments. There are moments that all of us have with our friends and families. But that doesn't mean that the relationships aren't great. And as long as we keep paying attention to the needs of each other, I think it'll remain 96%.
Mm-hmm. Now, if you don't mind my asking, I'd be very curious in your personal impressions of your time in Canada. You've been notable for taking the time and trouble to travel the country and meet Canadians. And I'm curious what you've learned about Canada and Canadians, and especially what might have surprised you. Do you have any preconceptions that turned out not to be quite right?
Well, yeah. I was told, I'd been to Canada several times before I got here. But one of the things, I don't know if it surprised me, but I've come to understand it more, is some of the differences that exist between the United States and Canada. We share a lot of values, but we have a very different set of historical experiences. One thing I talk about a lot was I'd been here about 3 days, and I was taking a tour on Parliament Hill, and we walked out of the Senate chamber, and there on the wall was this big portrait of King George III, the king that we revolted against in the American Revolution. And I thought I was being very funny. I said, hey, I guess that guy's a little bit more popular here in your country than he was back in mine. And everybody laughed, but as I thought about it, I thought, this is important. You guys have a different historical experience than we have, and your system of government is different. So that's part of it. It's hard to overestimate the importance of hockey to Canadians. Some of the things which I expected, but the diversity and the beauty of the country. One of the things that has been a surprise to me is just the physical size of the country. I took a trip to Alert. People say they've been to the end of the world. Alert's the end of the world. It is the most northerly inhabited place on Earth. And we flew in a military plane from Ottawa to Alert, and it is due north of Ottawa, and it was about a 7-hour flight. And the pilot said to me that if we flew due south from Ottawa, the same distance that we are flying due north in Canada, we would be in Venezuela. And when I heard that, I realized this is a big country. It really is. And I have tried very hard to travel around the country. I have tried not just to go to the big cities, but to go to small towns, to meet not just high government officials and business leaders, but citizens, people on the street, Aboriginal leaders, just musicians, anyone I can meet. Because I figure that the more people that I meet, the more that I understand Canada, the fewer absolutely stupid mistakes I'm going to make. I'll make some, but I'll make fewer.
That's error is human. Do you think that being in Canada this time has had any effect yet, at least on your understanding of the United States?
I have learned a great deal about Canada in the last 2.5 years, but I really do believe that, if anything, I've learned more about the United States than I have about Canada. I look at the relationships between our two countries in a little bit different way. I sometimes look back at things that are going on in my country, not through the prism of Canadian eyes, because I'm an American and I'll always be an American, but just a little bit differently than I would have looked at them while I was in the United States. And so I really do think I have gotten a better understanding of the United States as well as Canada, and probably a better understanding of myself.
Mm-hmm. And what's your impression of the Canadian and American cooperation on the global scene? Does the rest of the world understand us as close partners as we understand ourselves?
Yes. I think the rest of the world does understand that. But there are also things that Canada can do that the United States can't do. I mean, obviously there are things we can do that no one else can do. We have an enormous military, we have vast resources. But we also come with baggage. We come with historical baggage, we come with political baggage in parts of the world. And Canada, in many instances, doesn't have that baggage. You have relationships with countries in the hemisphere and elsewhere in the world that are much better than the relationships that we have. And we can cooperate, we can work together, particularly in some of those instances where you can use the advantages that you have and we can use the advantages that we have.
Very good. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to come in and talk today.
It's great to be here.
And to our audience, please join us again next week for another episode of Inside the Issues, the CIGI Online podcast. You can look for us at cgonline.org, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube.